Hello everyone and welcome back. So I was thinking before we go and start writing our own code in React, you might want to see the very basics of React. It's not that complicated. And what I felt at the beginning when I was following a tutorial, that new concepts were showing up over and over again. And I felt like it might be like a bottomless, well of information. But actually it's very, the core of the stuff that you want to use is quite limited. And so I think if you at least grasp what you have to use, what you can use with React, it's going to be easier to then follow what I'm going to do with the rest of this tutorial. So in here, I'm going to talk about JSX a little bit. Then we're going to look at function-based components and how to handle state, props, and events. Then we have some class-based components with state, props, and handling events. And I'm going to explain what that state and props mean. Handling unidirectional data flow, we're going to talk about that, and also what does it mean. I'm going to talk about it in a second when I get to that point. Then we have lifecycle methods, and that should be it. Yeah. So once you get those concepts, you should be okay with seeing whatever I'm going to throw at you, and I hope you're going to just feel more comfortable with that. So let's start from the beginning. And as you can see, this is my favorite. I already wrote my code and I'm going to just go through it kind of tutorial today. So it just, I could rewrite it, but it would take much more time. And I just want to go through it very quickly. So let's start with JSX, and maybe let me just start npm run dev, and I am in front end. So I should see successful here. Yeah, that's fine. And let me just refresh, and don't worry about this crazy mumbo jumbo there. So we use JSX to be able to write HTML in JavaScript. That's all you kind of have to know about it, because it's going to remind you of HTML a lot, and you'll see just those tiny differences and tiny cool additional functionalities that you will just need to remember. And once you do, it's going to just become your second nature. And so let's go and have a look here. So I just prepared some data first. So this is a simple function, right? And that's going to be a component in React, but I'm not talking about components yet, so don't worry about that. I'm just creating a function here, and I initialize some data here. So I'm going to use that below. So first, we are returning something. So that's going to be our component, right? Between React fragment opening and closing tag. And one thing you want to remember when you create a component, it needs to be just one tag, right? So if you want to have like multiple tags, so we have p here is div, strong, and so on, you need to encapsulate it in something. It could be a div, it could be a p, it could be anything, but it has to be just one tag being sent back in return, right? Because at the end of the day, it's going to be a JavaScript object, this whole thing, and then it's going to be rendered as HTML. Okay, so let's have a look here. So this is a simple paragraph, and as you can see, it looks exactly like HTML. This is div, this is strong. It's exactly the same stuff, and we're getting exactly what you would expect from HTML. Nothing to it. Then there's something happening here, some ID. You wouldn't use that in HTML. So what is it? We can grab some data from outside of the element, and we can pass that in here. So if I go here and I see that, okay, I have an ID. Let me see what that ID is. Let me inspect it. So let's go here, and I have an ID. ID is 123, and I didn't say 123 in here. I just said grab some data and put it in here. And as you can see, it is string, just like it has to be in HTML. And so it works pretty seamlessly there. Okay. So basically, and here is like, okay, well, you can do a bit more, not just grabbing data. You can do some operation here, like, okay, check if some ID is 123, then make it foo. If not, then make it bar. Let's see what we get here. We get foo because it is 123. ID is 123, and so we passed foo in here. So that's pretty cool. Okay, you see class name and you're like, why don't you just keep it class like in HTML? Well, there's something called class in JavaScript, so you can't shadow it. And so basically, we just use class name. And you might remember in HTML, when you have two words in an attribute, you would put a dash in between. In JSX, we use camel case, so something to remember. And then again, using those curly braces, you can do some cool JavaScript stuff. So whatever happens inside of those curly braces is JavaScript, pure JavaScript. And I'm saying, hey, could you go and check in some array, and some array has book, title, idea, Marek, and 2 cans of Heinz beans. That's a cool idea for a book title. And I just put it as an array. And what I'm saying is, hey, map it into something that will return a div with a key, and we need to pass a key. So when you map it, you don't only get the word by word, but also you specify, hey, give me an index of each item because I want to pass it into key, because React needs it to be needs that key there to know which one is which. Basically, it's not just plain HTML anymore. And I'm just doing some wacky stuff here. If you want to read it, you'll see what happens. If I refresh it a couple of times, you see how those colors change. So again, power of putting JavaScript into HTML, kind of into HTML. It's still JSX, but you see my point. So that's basically what JSX is. It's a little like it is supposed to be super close to HTML, but it has the power of JavaScript. So I really like it. So components, we have two different types. Just like with Django, we had function-based views and we had class-based views. Function-based are more simple, but need some workarounds and need more work. Class-based are a bit more powerful and they have a lot of stuff that come with them, but at the same time, you need to learn what they have. And we're gonna do that today. So function-based, pretty easy stuff. And as you can see here, we're going to look at function-based, how to handle state, how to handle props, and how to handle events. Okay, so what are props? What is state? So there's something you have to keep in mind when you use React, and it's data flow. And the data flow is as follows. You can pass some information down from the parent to a child. So if you look here, for example, if these were my let's say this is a parent element and this is a child, and these are not exactly components, so I'm not going to pass any information to P, but if that was my component and that was my component, somewhere inside here I could pass some information into like an attribute, just like some data equals, and I just pass something here, and that's how I pass props, and you'll see in a second how it looks. And that's the only direction that props can go. You can't send back anything from that child. So the conversation between parent and child is like, okay, the parent can talk to the child, but child can't talk back, which is kind of like, you can remember it this way, like the children cannot talk back, which is a good rule. Well, obviously children should be able to speak up. I'm not saying they shouldn't, but no talking back talk, you know. So yeah, there's some workarounds and I'll show you one, but then we're gonna look at something called Redux that allows us to keep kind of like a super watch over every element. So it doesn't matter who is the parent, who's the child, everyone can talk to that store and be like, hey, could you change that bit of information? Could you change that bit of information? And we keep track of all the data that we need for our app to work. But for now, we're gonna just look at pure React, which is working the way I just explained. Okay, so let's go back here. So we pass some props in here, and to access those props, we just say props.initial, whatever. Like if we pass something called initial dividend, and let me just look for the usage of function component at the very end here. I'm just sending something like, okay, give it 0 and give it 1, right? So initial dividend will be 0, initial divisor will be 1. And if I go back here to the actual function, you can see that I'm setting something to be props initial dividend and props dot initial divisor. Okay, and what I'm doing here is I'm setting state, and this use state is a hook that we use for state. At the beginning of React, if you used function-based component, it wouldn't have any way of using state. But then people were like, well, sometimes you want to have something super simple but still using state. So let's build this hook that we can import from React, use state, and then we're going to use something called use effect. And you import it this way in curly braces, okay? Let's go back here. And then to use that as a state, you say, hey, there's going to be something called dividend that's going to store whatever value we have of this state. We also need a setter, something that sets the value of this. So first we give it an initial value. So let's say it was 0 in our case. Let's look here. Yeah, I'm just passing 0 here. Then through props, we pass it here. So it's going to be 0. And then we have a function that allows us to set it to something else and then refresh this component. Okay, so that's what it does. These two elements of this function. This function is returning an item and a setter for that item. Okay, this is exactly the same. Here I'm logging some data because I was just debugging and checking, hey, what's going on there? Is this 0 and 1? Is this doing what I want to do? So in here we had some console log that I was checking, okay, could you log all the indices that we get from this random thing here? I just want to see what I'm getting. So I'm going to just delete that now because it's giving me some noise here. Refresh, and as you can see, by the way, I didn't have to do anything here. I had my NPM watching the changes. So as you can see now, we get just 1 in here. And why am I going? Yes, because I'm getting just divisor. So that should be 1, and it is because I set it to 1 as initial divisor. And then through props, it goes here, and at the beginning, it's 1. So I'm going to get rid of that. And I use this for debugging, just to check what's going on there. Why am I getting this or that? Or I just want to check what's going on with my data in between certain steps. So in here, it will be like at the very beginning of building the component. Right, so here we have some, so I explained props and I explained state, and this state is being set like this in here inside of event handlers, and we can create event handlers like this. So you just create a function inside of a function and you just call it handle change, and in this case I was like, okay, a name of the change. So what am I changing here? So and we're using set dividend to change the dividend in here. So if I change this, it's being changed, right? Dividend is being changed, divisor can be changed as well, and we get the result refreshed automatically, and you'll see it here. So when I click, and this is what I was clicking, this is the part I was clicking, and I said, hey, on change. So here's our input, right? And type number, just like in HTML. Again, camel case instead of dash, HTML and JSX difference. And then I just pass a pointer to this function. I don't call it, I just say this is going to be function you're going to use for onChange, right? And onChange goes here and it says, okay, so let me set that to whatever was the value of the e.target, which is this basically. So if I start writing here, it knows where to take the value from, and I need to parse it to int because e.target.value is a text, okay, by default. So we need to parse it to int, and we set this dividend, in this case in here, divisor, exactly the same way. And what it does, it not only set it to whatever we change it to, but also it refreshes this whole component, which is here. And you can see it automatically refreshes my view, okay? And it doesn't refresh the rest of them. So this is the only component that is being refreshed, and that's why React is so great, because it doesn't concern the rest of the page. It only changes the small bits on that we want to be changed, right? Okay, so this is how we got this message there that it can't be 0. If I make it 0, then we get the divisor can't be 0. Pretty cool stuff. And again, that's JSX using curly braces and some JavaScript inside. Cool. Let me go down. So we're talking about class-based now, and I prefer class-based. It's much more clear, much easier to handle. We get those methods from React component that help us with the data flow and the lifecycle. So let's have a look here. So again, we're gonna just talk about the component, state, props, and handling events. And later on, we're gonna look at lifecycle. Okay. So in here, we just say, this is gonna be our state. Instead of just, I think this is messier. This is less nice because you have to say, hey, here is one part and there's another. Although, I'm just more used to this maybe, but it's clearer to me, like, okay, initially it's going to be this. Initially it's going to be this, right? If we pass initial list to props, and by the way, if you use class-based component, you want to use this dot props dot initial list. So this is like self in Python. So basically I say, hey, I have some props, and check if we have this in those props initial list. If we do, then use it. If we don't, use an empty list, okay? And obviously we have to make sure that this is a list as well. So you might want to check it first. And also state will be this dot state dot whatever new item or item list, right? And you'll see it here. This dot state dot item list and whatever. You can do stuff with it, and you'll see what this is in a second. Or maybe now, because we're still talking about state, and then I'm gonna move on to handling events. So set state, instead of having a setter for each of the, as here, for each of the state item, see here, I'm just saying, hey, set the new state, and I need to pass the whole new state, right? And that's gonna do exactly the same thing. So it's gonna say, hey, this is the new state that I wanna be in, refresh the view, refresh the view, refresh. So every time you set state, it's gonna refresh the view. So the first thing you wanna remember and kind of think about you don't put it into render. If you put that set state into render, it's going to become a loop. It's going to try like, okay, I'm going to render this and then set state. Okay, again, I'm going to render this and set state. Okay, I'm going to render and so on. So you don't want to have that in a loop, and just be careful because at the beginning you might not know where to put it, and you might see like, oh, loop. There's a message that you get about the too many repetitions, and that means, okay, I put that set state somewhere that I shouldn't. Okay, so let me see here. So basically, yeah, in here we unpack the current state. So first of all, you need the curly braces around because it's going to be an object, the JavaScript object. And then we just say, hey, it's going to be, we are going to just use the current state, and whatever we want to change, we put in here. So, oh yeah, but I'm going to change new item. I might as well just put item list because we just have two items here, two elements of state. So I could just say item list, it's going to be what it was before, but this is going to be new. This is going to be changed to target value. But this is like if you had 100 of elements of state, you might as well just like unpack it like this, ... this .state. That's how you unpack an object. Cool. And so that's state and setting and getting. In here we have handling. So this is slightly different. If you look at function base, you write function, and then, well, you don't have to do it this way. There is a couple of different ways of defining functions in JavaScript, but you can use it this way in function because all you care about is that E in here, that event that we want to catch. Apparently, if you did that in class-based, in a class, it wouldn't have an access to this. We wouldn't be able to access our props and state because we wouldn't be able to access this, and we wouldn't be able to access set state as well. So you need it to be in this way. You put a name, no function, no nothing at the beginning, no prefix. You just put a name and then equals, and we just do the arrow notation like this, and we can pass that event in here, and then we have an access to this. Okay. And as you can see, we're just using that JSX in very similar way. Instead of just saying new item, we say this.state.new item. And in here we need to put that this. And as you can see here, so basically in function based, all you do is you start a function and you return whatever you want to return. In class based, obviously class doesn't return anything, so we need to at the very end you write a function called render, a method, class method called render, and you need to just return whatever you want to return, right? And in here you can see how nice and clean it looks because I wrote those small parts here. And here we have a form and we have a list, and let's have a look here. So that's the render of the class-based component that I was just going through. And let's see, I write some text here and I can enter, and I added something. I delete. It does work, and I can add some new stuff. And I just wrote a form, this part in one method, and then there is another part which is the list in here. And then I just say, hey, render this and render this using the curly braces. Okay, so I think class-based views are much more powerful, and the boilerplate is way better. You need to learn bits and pieces, right? Stuff like how to handle props. That as you can see here, we need to pass props to the function. Class-based already prepares something called props, because we extend this React component. And we can still, like if I look for this, you'll see that I'm passing something, initial list, foo, bar. If I refresh, you can see foo and bar already there. Okay, so let's go back. And I'm sorry I'm going so quickly through it. I know it's a lot of new information. Watch it a couple of times if you want. Play with the code. I'm going to leave it in GitHub. Play with it. I created a pretty cool playground for you. So go and break it. Go and break it. Okay, handling unidirectional data flow. So as I said, if I had a parent, and that's going to happen here. So here is one of the children. Here's another child. And here as a manager, it's going to be as like a parent component that's going to use those two. And as I said before, in here, this was one big class component that I just wrote this as a method and this as a method. So list was a method and the form was a method. In here, we have pretty much the same thing. I just changed it slightly so you can see that it is not exactly the same thing. Here we have hello world, here we have foo bar, here's a minus, blah, blah, blah. It does exactly the same thing. If I put some code, some text here and press enter, I get the item and I can delete. So we get the same thing, but it's it's two components wrapped in a parent component. And the problem is, how do we communicate? How does this list know what we put in here? How do we communicate? And as I said, the child can't tell the parent what happened in it. So how does the parent know what to put in here? And there is a way, let me show you. So maybe let me start from the parent, from the top. And you'll see from just the beginning that, okay, this is what needs to happen. And what needs to happen, we need to have certain handlers for the children written in the parent. So the list manager will put together add item form and list items, two different components. And we're going to pass down a function that is supposed to manipulate the parent itself, right? So it's going to actually change state of the parent, which then can, okay, I have certain lists that I need to pass down to the list item, but that list item will be manipulated by the add item form. So that's how we communicate. Here we pass down this function, this method. It uses it to change the state, and then it's like, okay, let me refresh the whole manager, so including add item form and list items, and I'm gonna just like pass down the new state that was manipulated by basically inside of add item form. So let me just go here. So as you can see, add item form, it's getting some props, and in those props, let me see here, props handle submit. So here we have handle submit of this component, but this .props.handle submit is something that we passed from the parent. It doesn't belong exactly to this. It was passed down, and we're gonna just saying, hey, this is gonna be the new item, and just take it and do something with it in here. And that's the item, and we set the new state. So we push something to the list, and then we set state with the new state. And why would I do that? I changed it here. So why would I say set state? To refresh. So I can manipulate the state, but if I just manipulate it and do nothing about it, then you won't see the difference on screen. And so that's why I say, hey, set state with just the state that we have after changing this. Okay, and then we just, and delete again, same story. If we want to make sure that the manager, the parent, knows what the item list is, we need to pass that handle delete to the list item that then talks back to, not talks back, but it uses the tool that was passed down, which is linked to the state of the parent. So pretty, it can get a little bit confusing. So give this a moment. Don't let me just finish here. I just gave you the very brief explanation. Get the code, look at the code, look at the app.js, which is supposed to be something very different, but for now we're just practicing, and play around with it. Try to follow the links. So these are the three components you want to have a look at. Add item form, list items, these are the children, and then we have list manager, which is a parent. And make sure you understand what happens with data. The data can only flow downwards. It only can be passed by the parent to the child, like this, or like this. We are passing down a function, but then using this function is like a telephone. It's like, hey dad, could you, or mom, could you change something in your list? Sure, no problem. And then refresh and send everyone the message that, okay, this is the new situation. I hope it kind of makes sense. It did take time for me to settle. Everyone is on the same pretty much page. It's like, okay, what's going on? Why do you pass it down? And why is it so complicated? Yeah, it is complicated, but at this time I don't even think about it. It became such a second nature to me. So it's not such a big deal. Okay, lifecycle methods. I think this is the last bit I want to talk about today. And lifecycle is pretty useful. I'm not going to show you any concrete examples how to use it and when are they becoming useful. I'm going to just show you when to catch certain moments of the component lifecycle, because each component, when it's created or destroyed, hits certain kind of lifecycle point of mount, change, or unmount. And with function-based, it's not so easy. I don't like it, and I pretty much, if I know I want to tap into the lifecycle, I would just go with the class-based, because maybe there is a better way of doing it. I don't know it, and to me, you can't really do mount. You can't separate mount, change, and unmount in a straightforward way. But anyway, let me just have a look here. So we have some state in here. And then so we are using another hook called use effect. Again, I had to import it there. And that hook, let me see here. That hook basically covers mount, change, and unmount. So let me show you here. This is our console. And I'm going to just scroll here, toggle function component, right? I'm going to click it. So we mounted this component here. this button only toggles it, so on and off. So as you can see here, we have always runs. So this bit here always runs whenever mount, change. I don't think unmount works. No, just mount and change. So maybe let me just change that to mount and unmount. And as you can see, it always runs. Then we get only when updated, the text was updated. And since when we mount something, we also kind of function-based components, they think the text was changed as well. This was just set up by useState. This was set up by useState as well. So so these two also run when the component is being mounted. Although in here you can see that depths, dependencies, it checks the change of input text. I'm saying like, okay, I'm setting something here, and please tell me if this was changed between one refresh and another. And if we type something in here, you can see that it always runs, and only when updated input text. So this was run, but this wasn't, like, because button wasn't changed. But if I click button, you see, okay, do something when unmounting. Oh, that's a problem. I thought that's gonna work, but it doesn't. It seems like, okay. Well, let me come back to this. That's why I don't like function-based components. So basically in here, I feel like, oh yeah, okay, so if I unmount now, so let me refresh, mount, unmount, nothing catches the unmount. So that's why it was there. So now if I go and refresh, I mount and I unmount, and click button, let me see again. Oh, here, sorry. So here's unmount, refresh, mount, unmount. So do something when unmounting. So as I explain it, I feel like you're super confused and like, what is this guy talking about? When do you use which, and why would you use the same function for 3 different things? Yeah, I have the same problem. I don't like it. I wouldn't use it. I wouldn't. If you want to tap into Lifecycle, don't use function-based because it's messy. I tried to do something here, but it doesn't really work. And so I don't like it. So let me just scroll down. And this is just some code that makes this work, okay? I'm not going to go into this. I just wanted to show you some Lifecycle. So here we have the class. Again, I like this state better. It just shows you clearly that this is going to happen. This is going to be the initial state of the component. And then we have 3 different methods. They come with the component, so React.component. They're already kind of in the system. You just need to say what's going to happen when did mount happens, when did update happen, or will unmount. So it's just after we mounted something, it's just after we updated something in that specific component, and that's when we unmount, just before we unmount. So let me see here. Let me refresh to clear the console. And now we are toggling the class component. Click, and we just get one action, one message. And that message is just a message, but you can put any code you want for that specific moment of the life cycle, just then. Now I'm going to change something here. So A, B, C, D, and 4 times it said text has been changed. So whatever you want to do when stuff is being updated. And by the way, in here I'm checking, hey, check the previous state and the new state. That's the new state here. And if the input was changed, then tell me the text has been changed. If the button changed, then tell me the button was changed. So as you can see now, it told me the text was changed, but I'm clicking now button, and now the button was clicked. It's telling me on the change. So that's way better control, I think. And now before we unmount, click, and only this was displayed. Only this. On and off, right? It's a very granular control, way better in my opinion. And that's why I usually just use class-based components. Okay, and let me see here. Okay, so that's just the code that is doing this, but you don't need to really. Oh yeah, so we have Lifecycle Manager, so it just puts together these. I needed a parent that is basically creating and destroying those components, so we can see when it's mounted and unmounted. So again, I'm not going to go through this line by line because it would take forever. But get this code, or at least go to GitHub and read it and see, okay, I see what's happening. If you know JavaScript, if it's just kind of like if you're trying to combine learning React and JavaScript at the same time, well, you might not understand much that is happening. I don't recommend doing it. Probably you want to start with JavaScript crash course. But you know, if you feel like doing 2 things at the same time, then go for it. And in here, again, we just put together some components. and we encapsulate it in react.fragment. It could be div if you want. And in here, we're just passing some props down. So it looks like an attribute, but it becomes prop inside of each of these components. I know it's like a super skimmed crash course, but I just want you to understand what I mean by function-based components, by class-based components, what is JSX, and what kind of stuff can be happening inside of JSX, where to put stuff, what else did we talk about? State, props, how to handle events for each of these. So I'm going to keep this code somewhere, not as an app, obviously, but I'm going to just have a route for this just so you can go back and see like, okay, what was the story with the class-based or function-based components? And you can go back here. Again, what else? Oh yeah, so handling unidirectional data flow, so how to communicate between children. So going back to the parent and sending data back to another child. And we also spoke about lifecycle methods. So I think it's bare basics, but I think it's gonna keep you going for a while. If you grasp it, or at least kind of know what's going on there, it should be much more comfortable for you to continue. And I'm very happy to announce that next time we're gonna go back to our own code and start changing what we have in Django into React. So I'm pretty excited about that, and thanks for watching, and I will see you then. Bye!